I wanted to start by maybe if we could just give some background as to kind of why we're here and what the events were that happened with DeSean Jackson and Steven Jackson and some of the other kind of instances over the summer. If you could kind of briefly summarize, just so people have a little background about those kind of events that transpired.
I'll say first off that right now I'm missing Brad Stevens doing his pregame press conference, and I couldn't be happier because he's going to say a bunch of nothings because it's before the last game that they're obviously going to win, and I am so glad to be here talking to all of you instead. And so I'm very much going to enjoy this. Now to the less fun part. So yeah, anti-Semitism is still around, and we really got a good reminder of it over the last month or so. And so it really started with DeSean Jackson, who is a star, might be a little generous, a very well-known football player that could be relatively frustrating because all he can do is run in the straight line very fast, but he's very good at it. He posted on his Instagram page, he had been posting some stuff about Louis Farrakhan for a little while, which, can obviously trigger offense to many, but to many also is just, him sharing somebody who he follows that's someone that preaches Black empowerment. And so that was a little bit of a prelude or foreshadowing to what happened next, which was that he posted a quote that was attributed to Hitler. It was a screenshot from a book. And the quote was, it was a couple paragraphs, but essentially was saying that that Jews have a secret under the table handshake cabal agreement with America to oppress Black people because Black people are the true children of Israel, and the Jews don't want them to realize that. So therefore, the Jews are working with America to continue to oppress Black people. And it was supposedly attributed to Hitler in the screenshot. So assumedly, this was supposed to be from the early 20th century. I'm pretty sure that's not true, and I'm pretty sure most of you here would agree that's not true. And so he posted that, and he just posted the screenshot, and there was no context to it. And so people obviously responded very negatively to that, and he posted a few follow-ups saying that what he's focusing on is the part about Black people being the true children of Israel, and that there is oppression against them to prevent them from seeing that. So he kind of eventually tried to distance himself from the anti-Semitic part of it and the whole cabal and conspiracy aspect of it towards focusing on the Black empowerment part of it. So he eventually, within 24 hours or so, apologized after his boss, the owner of the Eagles, who was Jewish, as well as the GM of the Eagles, who was also Jewish, came out and said, "This is insane. Why is one of our players doing this? We will never tolerate this," and he needs to apologize immediately. And to his credit, he apologized immediately. It was a bad apology. He followed it up with a much better apology, in which, most importantly, he said he wanted to go to the Holocaust Museum, learn from rabbis and temples, and try to understand why what he did was inappropriate, and learn and grow, which I think is what we should hope for when people do what he did, which was obviously, in his ignorance, offend other people. And he's recognizing that he was ignorant, and he wants to learn and be better so that he doesn't hurt other people. And it could have ended there. And that would have been wonderful if it just ended there and we all just realized we just need to learn more about each other and get along and try to find the good in each other. But then another Jackson appeared, and this was Steven Jackson. And this is how I ended up getting dragged into this, or to be fair, I dragged myself into it. But Steven Jackson is a former NBA player who was a kind of like an equivalent to DeSean Jackson when he played. He was not quite an all-star, but he was good enough that he was very well known, and he was always a very brash and charismatic and a very very out there individual, very flamboyant personality. So he was always very well known. After he retired, him and another player named Matt Barnes, who also was kind of known for that too, they started a podcast very recently called All the Smoke. And the podcast has become incredibly successful because they are willing to say anything, no matter how controversial, polarizing, whether they're revealing state secrets that you're not supposed to reveal to the public when you're in the fraternity of brotherhood that is the NBA player, things of that nature. And so they're great at keeping it real. And Steven Jackson decided he was going to keep it real by supporting DeSean Jackson in his right to speak out. And the problem that Steven Jackson with his actions was that he didn't say, I support DeSean Jackson trying to educate himself and trying to speak out against the disenfranchisement of African Americans, which I think everybody would have agreed with. What he said was, DeSean Jackson speaking the truth and y'all don't want to hear it. And so when you say something as vague as that, most people think you're saying that you agree with his conspiracy that Jews are controlling the world and oppressing black people. And so Steven Jackson doesn't apologize. He's unapologetic and he keeps it real. And so he continued to double down with the more criticism that he was facing. And over the course of basically 24 hours, because what's incredible is you can literally get in trouble within an hour, become a national story, and then the whole news cycle that used to take a week can carry out in a matter of a couple hours. So he started going on his Instagram and live streaming him talking to other Jewish people. And he had I forget the guy's name. It was just some random 25-year-old or something like that. It was a Jewish guy who had a really funny Jewish pun for an Instagram name. And so they started doing an Instagram live together where it's the two of them basically doing what we're doing now, where they're live broadcasting their video chat to each other. And throughout the conversation, Steven Jackson is basically the guy is asking Steven Jackson, can you just say that you're not being anti-Semitic and you don't believe this conspiracy that Jews run the world and all this kind of stuff? Can you just disavow that so that we can all be on the same page and we can move forward from this and talk about Black Lives Matter, which is what matters? And Steven Jackson, instead of saying, oh, of course, I didn't mean to offend Jewish people. Of course, I don't believe any of these conspiracy theories and these are absurd. He keeps going, you can't tell me what to say, or I'm just out here speaking the truth and y'all are trying to quiet me down. And the big thing that really turned the page was as they started to actually engage in a logical debate about whether there is a Jewish conspiracy to control the world. And he then has the classic one that I think all of us have heard at some point, which is, what about the Rothschilds? And of course, the Rothschilds have, their power has diffused dramatically over the last century. And while there are many Jews in banking, the Rothschilds certainly do not control the banking industry like they used to in Europe back in the day. That's all been gone for decades now. But anyway, it was a great sign of his ignorance on the situation. And then he summarized it well, where he said, listen, I don't care about your struggle and you don't care about mine, so I'm just going to focus on my struggle. And that was the most disheartening part. And that was the part where it was very clear where Steven Jackson was coming from, where Steven Jackson has been this incredible warrior for justice for the Black Lives Matter movement. He was actually best friends with George Floyd. They literally look identical and they called each other twin. They became friends because they somehow met in Houston at some point, and they looked at each other and they realized they were basically identical twins. And you can go look it up after this call and you'll see you can't even tell which one is which when they're next to each other, basically. And Steven Jackson went to Minneapolis right after George Floyd was murdered, and he gave this incredible speech at the State House. And it really was it was the inflection point that really rallied the Black Lives Matter movement. So Steven Jackson has become this incredibly important civil rights figure in America all of a sudden. And now he's out there saying, I only care about black people and I don't care about Jewish people. And that was devastating. And then there were other people that were stepping in and they were supporting what he was doing as well. There was actually another person named Malik Jackson on the Philadelphia Eagles who was supporting what DeSean Jackson was saying. There are a few other athletes that came out. They left emojis supporting DeSean Jackson or Steven Jackson, stuff like that. Nothing too substantial. But it did open the floodgates, and I'll tie it up here, which is that it opened the floodgates where over the next few weeks throughout July, and I guess it's calmed down the last few weeks, but maybe I've just been so busy that I've been missing it. But we saw Ice Cube, Nick Cannon, Puff Daddy, many other figures of major prominence in the Black entertainment community come out and support the teachings of Farrakhan, which I learned throughout this process I had always heard he was anti-Semitic. I did not realize he's not only is he extremely anti-Semitic, he's even proud to be compared to Hitler and said it was an honor to be compared to Hitler. Although to his credit, he did say that the Holocaust was less than ideal, I think. Which, yeah, it was definitely less than ideal for sure. But so at the end of the day, it exposed that there are so many people, especially African Americans, in the sporting world that I think mostly because of their following of Louis Farrakhan have lots of anti-Semitic ideals, and they believe in these conspiracy theories. And I think it definitely ties a lot into Farrakhan. It ties a lot into the fact that people are more into conspiracy theories now than seemingly ever before, because it's so easy to get drawn in nowadays, especially when most of these people get their information from Instagram. And I can talk a lot about that because I've heard a lot about that from many athletes. But so at the end of the day, it is so much easier to grasp on to a conspiracy theory that very quickly explains why there is this incredible disenfranchisement of Black people in this country still to this day. And it's much easier to latch on to the fact that to the idea that Jews are in power and Jews are the ones controlling this, rather than just that there is an overwhelmingly, almost impossibly too large to comprehend amount of just systemic imbalance and discrimination going on in this country. So I'll toss it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to talk about some of those responses. And we did have Cannon and pretty famously, and Ice Cube. And this was not Ice Cube's first foray into anti-Semitic conspiracy theories.
Shocked to hear that.
Yeah, and obviously he is affiliated with some people who had some big problems with anti-Semitism in the past. But I want to talk about some of the other responses from Jaylen Brown, who you work closely with, to Julian Edelman. But before we do, kind of on an emotional level, on a personal level, as a Jewish guy in sports who knows some of these people with a visibly Jewish name, what was your kind of initial, right before we get into all of the intricacies and nuances here? How did this affect you, just as a Jewish guy in this space?
It's funny. It's funny that you just said visibly Jewish name, because I don't think generally people have realized that Weiss is like an obviously Jewish name, and at least in America, because it's not a Goldberg or Goldstein or something like that. And so I've had a lot of players tell me, "Oh, I didn't realize you were Jewish," when it's come up before, which has been very surprising. Because I feel like I come across as very Jewish, but sorry if my computer is malfunctioning. So
you're good.
Oh, okay, good. Sorry, I don't. You know what? Actually, I'm gonna. No, never mind. Sorry, for some reason my computer's going crazy right now. So yeah, so I was not that surprised, honestly. I knew that I kind of heard things like this before. Nothing quite as black and white as the way that DeSean Jackson was putting it, for sure, but I certainly knew it. And it's funny, I just kind of hinted at it, was the power of Instagram now, where most athletes spend all day on Instagram and they get all their information from Instagram, and that's obviously incredibly dangerous. And so I covered Kyrie Irving for 2 years. He left Boston for Brooklyn this past summer, and Kyrie Irving talked a lot about conspiracy theories that he saw on Instagram. He was a big believer in chemtrails and the Illuminati, stuff like that. And I mean, I'm not going to throw any accusations against him, and as much of a melancholy malcontent as he can be, I certainly don't think that he's a prejudiced person. That's never. I think he's actually a very good-hearted person, and he just enjoys being a foil against the media and the public and all that kind of BS that these athletes have to deal with. I think he actually is a very good person at heart. But he gets all of his information basically from Instagram. And so, with Instagram, it's just so easy to come across a post that has very scary and captivating information and latch onto that and then dive into a rabbit hole. And then you come out of that rabbit hole and you don't go and fact check it. And I've done that plenty of times. Then I go and fact check it. It's usually BS every single time. And so I could easily see how there's so many of these athletes, especially when athletes are sharing stuff like sharing Louis Farrakhan stuff, that it's so easy to dive down the rabbit hole with Louis Farrakhan and become misinformed. And so I've heard other players talk about Farrakhan before, and and so I just always assumed that there was probably a lot of this kind of latent anti-Semitism below the surface, and that they're obviously not trying to say anything out loud because they know that a lot of the owners in the NBA are Jewish. And so one of the things that's really come out of this for me is I've heard from a lot of executives around the NBA who obviously are very disturbed by this, and they want to speak out, but most of them feel like they can't speak out right now because the focus is on Black Lives Matter, and that if they wanted to speak on this, that it would be seen as a distraction, and it would risk alienating their team or distracting their team while they're in the middle of the playoffs right now. And you can't risk that because there's right now, if maybe during the season or during the off season, you can deal with the kind of you could deal with that whole process playing out. But right now, it could literally cost your team its run at the championship. And so I think, pretty reasonably, none of these executives really want to speak out. But we at least have seen people like Charles Barkley and a lot of other people that are in the media who are in a position to speak out that have actually confronted this head on. And I do appreciate that.
I want to hit on in a few minutes the kind of role of Jews in sports, and with Jews kind of disproportionately being on the management and ownership side, that I think those are dynamics that are impactful here. But what do you think is the right societal response, right? So there have been a lot of people who have called for the Eagles to say, cut DeSean Jackson. Others have said DeSean Jackson shouldn't have the platform and be celebrated as an advocate. Some have defended them, right? Dwayne Wade was a prominent voice who kind of initially voiced some support for the Jacksons. I think Jaylen Brown told you that when players have big platforms, they really have a responsibility to speak carefully, right? And about about the things that they really know. But of course, we don't know what we don't know, right? If we are mercurial point guard on the Celtics looking up Earth is flat conspiracy theories theoretically, right? We don't know what we don't know. On the other side, Julian Edelman, who's been a rival of DeSean Jackson's and has recently kind of embraced his Jewish roots, he reached out, and you talked about this briefly, and said, let's do a shared visit. We'll go to the Holocaust Museum together. We'll go to the Museum of African American History together. Omri Caspi, formerly of the NBA, used to take players to Israel to learn more about Jews and the state. What do you think is the right response? I mean, should we be looking for an apology? Should we be looking for the team to punish? Should we be doing something more like what Edelman is suggesting?
I think that cancel culture is obviously out of control, and that you need to respond to, I think you have to respond to the response, not the initial action initially. You have to give people a chance. I mean, it obviously depends on what the initial action is. If DeSean Jackson went out there and said we need to burn the Jews and throw them in the camps, then I don't really think there's an apology that can ever make up for that. What he did was bad, but it wasn't to the point that he can't try to make up for it. And to his credit, I didn't even get into that part. He actually had a conversation that he broadcasted with Rabbi Wolpe from Mount Sinai in LA. It was Mount Sinai, one of the major LA temples. And he actually, you could watch over 30 minutes. He actually kind of realized why he was being anti-Semitic, and he apologized. And he said not enough, but a lot of the right things that made me think, okay, well, at least he's been educated, and at least he starts to realize what he's done wrong. I don't think he's really I think he's just going to wait for this to go away, because I don't think he actually cares about this, and he probably is going to be anti-Semitic no matter what. But either way, he made his apology, and we at least see that this is a rectified situation. And now I think with DeSean Jackson, who has his own podcast and things of that nature, I think the free market should decide, do they want to hear this guy still? Because really, his value, because he's just someone who's just talking at this point, his value is basically, do people want to hear what he has to say? And now that he's exposed himself as being anti-Semitic and ignorant, is what he has to say, is that still a value? And so I think Showtime is his employer. If I were Showtime, I would certainly try to figure that out as much as possible. Figure out, will people see Showtime as an anti-Semitic brand if we continue to let DeSean Jackson be associated with us? And I think that's just something that has to be evaluated on case by case basis. But I think that if he apologizes and people are able to move forward with that, then I think that's fine to move forward with. And then when it comes to DeSean Jackson or people that are employed in their in their athletes, and so this is something that's not specifically relevant to their job function. I do think that we should very much base how we feel about whether they should be banned basically for what they did based on whether they can show contrition and show that it's genuine, because it's the same thing. It's the same idea of endorsing somebody's anti-Semitic behavior. And I think that DeSean Jackson is showing contrition and is showing that he's willing to learn. And so I thought that it was great that Julian Edelman responded in the way he did, as well as I want to say Zach Brown is a Pittsburgh Steelers player. It was that. Okay, good. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. He has been incredible in response to this. He was someone who didn't. What's that?
It's Zach Banner. Is that his name?
Banner. Thank you, Zach Banner. I think there is a Zach Brown on the Steelers as well, but yeah. So Zach Banner, who is I think an offensive lineman who plays for the Steelers, who was someone who didn't really know much about Judaism. He's also African American, didn't know much about Judaism, and then the Temple shooting happened in Pittsburgh, and it dramatically changed his life when that happened. It completely opened him up to just the idea that there was bigotry against other people besides black people in this country. And he has become this incredibly vocal person on DeSean Jackson, and over the course of a couple days built up this incredible movement where he had people donating tens of thousands of dollars to Jewish causes, to his own charitable foundation, which I can't remember what it was about, but he had rallied. He was basically posting tons of messages about how we need to about things that he wanted to do to help bridge that divide that DeSean Jackson was exposing. And it was incredibly inspiring, and he received a ton of outpouring of support and love from the Jewish community and from the African American community on it. And it was it was great to show that these moments can be used as building moments, that once we all have to finally rip off the Band-Aid or expose the rock and see what's underneath, that this gives us a chance to both tackle the problem together and therefore bring us closer together. And so anytime that we can do that, I think we need to be able to move forward in that direction rather than move forward on the punishment direction, because the whole point is that we're trying to fix these situations when we can find them. And the message that you send by taking what DeSean Jackson did and turning DeSean Jackson into an advocate for anti-Semitism or against anti-Semitism, and an advocate for linking the Black Lives Matter movement together with fighting anti-Semitism and other forms of prejudice, that strengthens the movement and it strengthens society overall.
And I thought and it's the B3 Foundation is Banner's organization. What I thought was so impressive about Banner is he is a 26-year-old offensive lineman who nobody knows, right? And so DeSean Jackson has been wildly famous for a decade, and nobody knew who Zach Banner was, which he's a more replaceable player. He's got less of a following. He really took a big risk to do that, and he wasn't the only one. You mentioned Charles Barkley. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote a really thoughtful piece in the Hollywood Reporter. Jamil Hill, who's a really prominent Black journalist of the formerly Orlando Sun-Sentinel and then ESPN and now at The Atlantic, wrote a really personal and provocative piece in The Atlantic about anti-Semitism, drawing on her own kind of previous ignorances. She referred to, I think it was the Celtics, compared them to Hitler at one point. I think that was the story, and kind of didn't understand how that landed at first, and talked about that. One of the things that I think then is important for us to do is to celebrate, to your point, to celebrate and to thank when folks stand up for us too, right? I think that's a kind of an important thing. Larry Johnson was another voice that was in this, a former running back for the Chiefs who's been posting a lot of anti-Semitic things too. One of the things, though, that I think is interesting is there was, during a recent game, Oakland A's bench coach Ryan Christensen gave what looked pretty clearly like a Nazi salute. And he's a white guy. He said it was a socially distanced high five. And when Liam Hendricks pushed his arm down, Christensen did it again. And there was a little bit of blowback, but it paled in comparison to the response to Cannon or DeSean or Steven Jackson. And I'm curious, like, what did you think of the Christensen seeming Nazi salute, and why do you think the response there was so muted in relation to what it was to the black athletes?
It's a great question, and I think this is probably specific. I think this is a incident specific explanation for the most part, and so people really understand. He was doing the fully extended Nazi salute, and his teammate who was running by him literally grabs his arm and like recocks his arm to get his like elbow down and do a fist pump like this as opposed to the full extension, and then the guy turns around and he just throws it out there again. And I thought, first off, bravo to his teammate who didn't just like run by him and say don't do that. He literally stopped and corrected his arm posture, which was amazing, and I loved that. And it was a great subtle but straightforward way to correct anti-Semitism. Literally fix it and then move, try to move forward from it. And I think that the bench coach was just being a stupid, like a stupid jock for the most part. He's like, I'm going to do something silly and provocative. I mean, when we were kids, I think we've all done something like that to a certain degree. And it was just very, very childish and juvenile of him. And I think the main reason why he isn't facing the same kind of backlash was that he did that. It looks like just like a stupid, goofy, inappropriate, quick little action, while the other events that we're talking about, which did happen to all be with black people, so it does look like there's a difference in how we're treating white versus black people in the situation. But I think it's that all those other situations were with people's words. So you're literally communicating and choosing your words to express how you feel. And it was done with a level of thoroughness and continuation and vigor that is way beyond what he was showing, because he was laughing and goofing around, and you could see that it was supposed to be a kind of, a lighthearted joke, even if it was like a very stupid joke to do when you're on live television. Who is that stupid? Apparently baseball players. But the all the different Jacksons, the Cannon, Ice Cube, they were like taking their time and really thinking through how bigoted they wanted to be in those situations. So there was a level of intent that is so much more significant. It's like first degree versus manslaughter, essentially. This was the salute by the A's guy was just kind of a stupid thing in the heat of the moment, while there was a level of foresight and planning and intent that went into all the other bigotry that we saw from the other athletes.
You mentioned earlier Jeffrey Lurie, the owner of the Eagles, who's a proud alum of Brandeis University, obviously the best college in the country. And
besides Boston University.
Yeah. So the owner of the Eagles, the commissioner of the NBA, right? There are a lot of really prominent Jews in management, in ownership, in the commissioner's offices of these leagues. There aren't as many, shockingly, in the clubhouse, right? Among the players. How do you see that as kind of affecting the dynamics of this situation?
I think it's the dynamic of the situation. It's the perception for a lot of these players that come into the league, that they've always had this perception that Jews are in control, and then they get to the league where there's billions of dollars and you're only seeing Jews for the most part in the positions of significant power. It reinforces that stereotype for you, and that's why I've always suspected that there was a little bit of that latent anti-Semitism bubbling below the surface with a lot of these players, because to be fair to these players, if you were educated on these anti-Semitic beliefs when you were younger and you don't even know better, and then you get to the league and you think that you're seeing it, because obviously you have a confirmation bias, and so you're looking around and you're seeing that my GM is Jewish or my owner is Jewish, but the people that are cutting my checks and deciding my job security and all that are Jewish, and those are the only Jews that I'm seeing around here. then it would completely reinforce your stereotypes, and it would make you believe it even more. And it's not the kind of thing that you can go around asking people, hey, are Jews in control of all the money in the world? You know, you can't, it's not something you can really have an open conversation about. So you have to be isolated in your ignorance to it. And it's really hard for you to be able to lose that, or to be able to be exposed to counterpoints to it, because you can't really conversate about it openly unless you're talking about it behind closed doors with people that you really trust. And so I'm sure there are a lot of conversations going on between some players where one player tells another that, you know, that they think Jewish people are controlling all the money in the NBA and all the power in the NBA, and the other person might just go, I don't know, man. Or the other person might go, come on, that's not true, and here are many reasons why. But it's not reasonable to expect a bunch of young athletes who aren't even going to college for the most part, who just to expect them to have that level of worldview, because it's, you know, and it's not even being stereotypical against athletes. It's that as an athlete, you who's now, they're actually going to get rid of the college rule soon in the NBA, so you can go straight from college. But so you might not be exposed to diversity at all coming up, and you spend most of your time practicing sports and then being very popular socially. There's not a lot of people like Jaylen Brown that spend a lot of their time really pursuing academia and things like that. And it's not to say that players are ignorant in general. Like, actually, I mean, players have always been rather, smart and well-informed people, and most people don't realize, to be a professional athlete, you have to have a level of intelligence that's generally superior to the average public, because it requires an incredible amount of intellectual capacity to play the game. So even the dumbest athletes out there, they still have the ability to memorize things at a level that most of us can't even dream of. It's so, so it, basically the point is that there's not a lot of opportunity for education. And so what's good is, nowadays there's been so much, over the last decade or so, there's been so much more investment from just from the overall systems that players end up being a part of, whether it's the basketball organizations, the schools they go to. There's been a lot more investment in educating them beyond the classroom, of putting them in to camps, or putting them into programs or special events where they have speakers that inform them on these kind of things. And they're trying to educate these athletes better, so that when they get to the NBA, they do have a lot of the worldly experience that you don't get when you're a very busy, highly successful teenager. And so I think that tide definitely is turning, but it's obviously going to be a relatively slow process.
A couple more questions, then I think we'll see if people who are listening have questions they want to post in the chat for you before we wrap up. One of the things that a lot of the discussions surrounding these things were rooted in this kind of Jewish-Black dichotomy. But there are tons of Black Jews and of Jews of color. And I'm fully cognizant that I'm a white Jewish guy asking you a white Jewish guy this question, but how do we kind of as a broader Jewish community make sure that we're fully representing our own racial diversity when we're talking about issues of race, whether it has to relate to the Jewish community or not. But I think there was this implication that, Jews are white, right? And there's a really famous book that that's out recently, How the Jews Became White, right? Explaining race in America. But I'm curious what you think in terms of how we kind of avoid this Jewish-Black dichotomy that really does erase a pretty large proportion of the Jewish community.
Yeah, the funny thing about it is that my co-author on the op-ed that I did for The Athletic, that I assume is one of the reasons why you had me come here, was Kendra Andrews, who she is a Black Jewish reporter who covers the Denver Nuggets for us. And the first thing that she mentioned when we started talking about this piece, and we also did a podcast as well about it, was she had this feeling of, what about me? And from her, she has I think it was a white Jewish mother and a Black father who wasn't Jewish, and so she was raised Jewish, and so, but for her, regardless of what her, I guess, her parental identity is, her identity is as both as an African American woman in America, well, obviously African American, and then she's also Jewish. And for her, those, while I'm sure there is, and I'm not going to speak for her, but I'd imagine that there is a level of duality to those two things at times. But for her, it's also her singular identity as well. And so But like for me, I don't really know that many Black Jewish people. I grew up in Newton, Massachusetts, which Newton itself is mostly white and Asian, and so I don't know if there were. I don't remember there being any Black Jews at my temple, and I don't remember there being any Black Jews at the JCC in Newton. Um, and so I just didn't really. I mean, I did have a lot of Black friends growing up because Boston's really good about busing people out from the city into the suburbs to promote diversity, which has been wonderful and was a huge impact on my life. But as far as Jewish people specifically, I don't think I knew any. And so, to be totally frank and fair to people that don't even think about that aspect, for me, I generally think of Judaism as being white for the most part. And it's important that we take the extra step to recognize that that is not true at all. And so what I got tons of messages after, because for me it was, I first tweeted about when Steven Jackson thing happened. I sent out a couple tweets that said something like, this is really appalling and it's really sad to come from him and I hope he can do better or something like that. And I just threw out that tweet thinking nobody's going to care. It ended up going completely viral, and naturally I got hundreds and hundreds of responses to it. Some of them wanted me to go die. Some of them were really grateful. But some of the really interesting ones were people saying that they were Black Jews who feel very ostracized by the Jewish community. And I told them, I'm sorry, I don't even know what to say to that, because frankly, I've just never really interacted with Black Jewish people in my life. And that's obviously something that's really terrible to hear. And so I think the point I'm trying to make here is that it is definitely important that we talk about this and that we address this, because we definitely cannot be concerned with the Black community being anti-Semitic towards us when if there is an issue even within the Jewish community about how we're treating Black people within our community, where obviously that's the whole issue of hypocrisy, that you can't complain about other people being bigoted when there's bigotry even within your own community. And obviously bigotry is going to be around in every single community forever, but as a community that is incredibly sensitive and incredibly focused on fighting bigotry within ourselves and for everybody else, I think that this is something that clearly needs, at least I've learned recently, needs to be prioritized and needs to be explored further.
And speaking of that, we Jews Online were really quick to point out the silence of a lot of Black professional athletes, or to criticize those who, like, a Dwayne Wade, who kind of initially defended DeSean and Steven Jackson. And I think the disappointment, it seemed to be even more pronounced when people like Dwayne Wade, who has been an advocate for equality, or Steven Jackson, right, and Dave Zirin wrote about this, that how, Zirin wrote that he was worried that bad faith actors would pounce upon Steven Jackson's anti-Semitism as a way to delegitimize his work for Black Lives Matter. But prominent Jews have also in the past said and done some incredibly racist things. And in the sports world, right, famously Donald Sterling, the late Jewish owner formerly of the LA Clippers, was, I think it would be an understatement to say, a notorious bigot. How should we as a community handle that at our own house? And so given our collective response to this particular crisis, how do you feel like we should respond when bigotry manifests from our own community? And how could we have responded to, say, Donald Sterling in a way that would have been both kind of just and right, but also demonstrates to other groups that we're not going to stand for inequality or bigotry, whether it's directed at us or coming from one of our own.
Did you say the late Donald Sterling?
Didn't he die?
I don't remember, but
I think he
died. I'm pretty sure he did, but I hate that guy so much that I didn't even realize he was dead.
Oh no,
he was always dead to me.
I have bad news.
He's still alive.
He's still alive.
Oh well.
Sorry.
Well, whatever.
I thought he died.
I did too for some reason when you said that, but it just goes to show he's that bad that we kind of just wished he was dead the whole time. And if anyone's not familiar with Donald Sterling, I mean, he's bad. All the stuff that you heard about Trump with with the C for colored on the housing applications back in the day, Donald Sterling got sued for it successfully, I think, many, many times. He was one of the worst offenders of that kind of thing. And so, it's funny because Donald Sterling was just known as a terrible piece of garbage. She was incredibly racist as long as I've been around the NBA, and even before I was in the NBA when I was just a kid. And so I think everyone would talk about Donald Sterling and they would say, "Oh yeah, that guy's horrible, but he's an owner of a team, so there's nothing we can do about it." And it was it was one of an incredibly groundbreaking moment in American history when, and I'm frankly should have dramatically reduced systemic inequality when this happened, and maybe it will eventually, but we'll see. But he got caught on tape calling Magic Johnson the N-word, which literally like the nicest person in America and the most beloved person in America, and that's who you're calling the N-word. But so when that happened, the NBA forced him to sell the team. They didn't even strip the team from him. They just forced him to sell the team for a massive record profit. He sold it for $2 billion to Steve Ballmer from Microsoft. So Donald Sterling ended up making plenty of money off of this situation, but it was the first time that we'd ever seen an owner forced out of their team because of their racism. And so it was like I think it was the beginning of cancel culture, basically. But it was reasonable. It was deserved in that case. And it wasn't just because of that one situation. It was because he had a history of discrimination, even within the NBA. And frankly, in hindsight, when we looked back at it, we were like, when one of the most famous players in NBA history, whose name was Elgin Baylor, became the GM of Sterling's team, and then Sterling fired him, apparently had been totally racist. Baylor sued Sterling and won for Sterling's racism and for him failing to pay what Baylor was owed. That should have been the moment right there where we were all like, this guy needs to be forcefully removed from the NBA. And it took years later for people to be more woke, frankly. And then for the Magic Johnson tape, you had to have this tape that was just this burning smoke. It wasn't like a smoking gun. It was a gun firing bullets nonstop, basically, to be able to finally get him out of there. And I think that looking back on it, we realized we missed so many opportunities where this guy should have been censured or possibly even removed. And we never really spoke up on it. We didn't. It was the same thing with like Harvey Weinstein, where Harvey Weinstein, I remember when I was a teenager watching 30 Rock, and they were making jokes on 30 Rock about it, like never be alone in the hotel with Harvey Weinstein or something like that. Or the Bill Cosby jokes, I think, were also in that show as well. And we would hear those and we'd be like, people are clearly saying what we think they're saying, but for some reason it's not resonating with us. And I think it's taken us such a long time for us to be able to for us to go from being snarky about these things to actually confronting these things and being serious about them. And I think we're just in an age where we can take action in a way that we just hadn't before. And so all that is to say that, yeah, clearly the Jewish community was not doing a good enough job taking action, because there should have been protests against Donald Sterling outside of the Staples Center in Los Angeles every single day that he was an owner until the NBA had to get rid of him back in the 1990s, let alone in 2014 or wherever it happened. So, yeah, the Jewish community, because we're always going to be a small community that's always going to be targeted, we always need to be as vocal as humanly possible about anything that we see that can undercut the foundation of what should be our central ethos of equality and against bigotry. And so we want to lead by example as much as possible. And so it's very important that we don't fall prey to the same thing that we're criticizing other movements based around a single demographic identity, of being afraid to speak up against wrongdoing within our own community out of fear that it undercuts us overall, and that people are going to think badly of us because they see one of us being wrong. We need to send that consistent message that we're not going to be hypocritical, and we're going to stand by our values, so that people see over time the power of those values and they adopt those as well.
And if people have questions, you can type them in the chat if you have any questions. One final one that I have, kind of probably a quicker one, is athletes often, I teach a class at the high school, sometimes called Sports and Resistance in American History. And we talk about athletes, we kind of use that as a way of talking about American history, right? So talking about the civil rights movement and sports and things like that. And one of the things that athletes often get told is shut up and dribble, right? Stick to sports and things like that. And that emerged again as a response from some people here. How do you, like, these guys have a platform, right? These men and women have a platform. Do you feel like it's appropriate for them to be speaking out on things that aren't related to the triangle, offense or things like that? Like, what do you think is given their platform? How do you think that they should be kind of dealing with that?
Well, the triangle offense has been dead for about 20 years now, so I'd be really concerned if they were still talking about it. But
well, the Knicks tried it again a couple of years ago.
Oh, that was the problem. It was already dead at
yeah.
that point.
I don't know if that was the problem.
It's one of many. I'm as strong an advocate as I can be for people speaking out and using their platform. I do it all the time on my platform. I was doing it so much that I cut back because I felt like a crazy person yelling at a cloud every single time I opened the news and Donald Trump did another crazy thing that destroyed society today. So I actually had to cut back just for my own sanity and because I didn't want my brand as a public figure to be co-opted by my completely justified hatred of Donald Trump. But so so I am so proud of so many of the athletes that are seizing this platform. And going back to Jaylen Brown, who you talked about earlier. So when I was putting together that op-ed, when we started putting it together, we released that op-ed about 5 days after the story had kind of like peaked. And obviously there were a lot of people complaining, why are you bringing this up now? And for one, I'm always somebody that prefers to take a little bit of time to really understand the situation, let the situation play out for one, so that recognizing that a situation will kind of evolve over time and then there's the right time to look at it. So there was part of that. But the other part of it was that I wanted to evolve the story, and there hadn't been a single NBA player that had spoken about it. There was one. It was and for Alan, we'll definitely drop a link for the editorial in the podcast. Absolutely. But so there had been one player that had spoken out, and it was Ennis Cantor, who is a Turkish national who is currently banned from Turkey and is an enemy of the state in Turkey because he has used his NBA career in America he's used that to give him a platform to speak out against the dictatorial oppression by Recep Erdogan, the president, I think, of Turkey, who has basically turned into a dictator over the last half decade or so. And Cantor, every single day, speaks out on it. He goes on every single news channel, CNN, Fox News. He goes to DNC events. He goes to Republican events. He doesn't care. He will do anything involved in the political world to speak out and expose what's happening in Turkey. And he literally has been declared a terrorist by Erdogan, and Erdogan even requested Interpol take out a red notice, which means that Interpol can literally extract him from any country in the world and bring him back to Turkey. That's how bad. Thankfully, Interpol rejected that request. But so that's how bad things are for Ennis Cantor in Turkey. And Ennis Cantor continues every single day to speak up. And I've written a lot about it. Ennis and I have become very close. Ennis came to Boston this year, so I wrote a whole thing on his activism, and he took me to his mosque one day in Boston where he goes to pray, and it was an incredible experience for me because I'd never been inside a mosque before, and it was amazing to get to experience it. And we sat down and we had dinner, and he started asking me about Judaism because he didn't really know anything about Judaism. And some of his questions clearly revealed his ignorance about Judaism. And it clearly revealed that he is asking questions about banks and Hollywood and stuff like that. It was very clear that he had heard all the anti-Semitic stuff, but didn't really know any of the actual real stuff. But to his credit, because of everything that he's gone through and because of who he is as a person, he recognized that when he's hearing negative things about a certain demographic, that it's probably not the truth, and he wants to learn more. And so I told him about what my experience as a Jew is like, which has been a very banal, melancholy, typical Jewish experience. I told him about Hanukkah. I tried to remember most of the 4 questions from Passover, that kind of stuff. And he was really fascinated by it, and it was a great conversation. And then I noticed he started speaking up and supported Judaism a lot more after we had that conversation. And I was so grateful to that. And so, cut 2 months later, and he's in the DeSean Jackson thing happens. And all of a sudden that night, I turn on CNN and Ennis Cantor is on CNN, I think from the bubble in Orlando in his hotel room, speaking out about how we need to support the Black Lives Matter movement, and we need to confront bigotry that we see against everybody, regardless of race and all this stuff. And it was phenomenal. And then not a single other NBA player came and spoke out. So myself and Fred Katz, who was one of my co-authors, um, oh sorry, what was I gonna say? Um, the
With
my
Fred Katz.
co-author Fred Katz, there we go. He and I decided we were going to ask we're going to try to ask an athlete about what they thought of this, because none of the NBA players had actually spoken up about it. And so he asked Washington Wizards player Admiral Schofield, who gave a solid answer, and I asked Jaylen Brown, because Jaylen Brown had been super vocal the entire time about all these other issues related to Black Lives Matter. So I wanted to see what he thought of this situation. And to his credit, he said, I don't really know much about the situation yet, because I think it had just happened. But then he gave that comment. And, I was a little disappointed that he didn't say specifically anti-Semitism is not okay, and I don't know what happens, but definitely don't condone any sort of anti-Semitism. But what he said was definitely very valuable, and so I really appreciated what he said. But it was shocking to see that then no other NBA players, active NBA players, came out and said anything. While there had been plenty of NBA players who, on DeSean Jackson's original post, had left comments, at least, supporting him, whether it was like fist emojis or fire emojis, stuff like that. So it was really shocking that nobody came out and said anything. And I'm sorry, I can't even remember your question anymore after saying all that, but I hope that answered it.
Yeah, one of the I think Eton Thomas was another voice that was supportive of DeSean Jackson. And I mean, I think one of the Zyron talked a lot about this of should somebody's participation in one bigotry make us not kind of think with credit, give them credit for their fighting against a different one, right? And that's, I think, it's a really challenging concept when Stephen Jackson is doing a lot of harm in one realm and maybe some good in another, a lot of good in another, and kind of navigating that. And I thought Jaylen Brown, who really, I mean, I think he drove like 15 hours from Boston to go participate in protests, and has been a really prominent and thoughtful voice. And so I thought seeing his comment was, especially from a young up and coming star, was a really helpful thing. There's a question here. Do you think should today's NBA players learn about Jewish history, the Jewish history of the sport in the NBA? Do you think that would be valuable? Do you think it's more about kind of connections like you were talking about with you and Ennis Cantor?
Yeah, I think what a lot of African American athletes would be surprised about is to learn how popular basketball is in the Jewish community. And I don't know where exactly that stems from. I assume it stems from the fact that Jews were put into urban ghettos when they first arrived here in the early 20th century. And so therefore basketball was the prominent sport there, and therefore they picked up basketball. Because like for me, my passion for basketball is passed down from my father, who was a diehard basketball fan and taught me everything about basketball, and it became my life. And so I'd imagine that's where it comes from. And so I think that would be very illuminating for African Americans to recognize that in the early 20th century, Jewish people, for the most part, were forced into American ghettos, and they were very much disenfranchised, and they faced incredible anti-Semitism when they first came over too. And so, learning about our common threads that, of how things cycle, and of course, like, in the Italian community, for instance, it's always had, there's always been a lot of issues with anti-black sentiments and racism within the Italian community. And it's ironic because for me, at least, being from Boston, when I think of Italian and Irish communities, I think of that as originating from the inner city and being oppressed and being in the ghettos in Boston when they first came over 100 years ago, and how eventually they were able to, eventually those communities were able to work their way out of poverty and spread and diversify throughout suburbia. And so for a lot, so I think that maybe if you're not from maybe probably a northeast city, that you probably maybe don't have the same kind of view on the origins of those communities as well, and those immigrant communities as well. But I guess the point is to recognize the shared history and lineage between immigrant communities at some point started out from those same points of urban poverty and had to eventually work their way out. And obviously, we're seeing now, after so long, African American communities still struggle to work their way out because of systemic racism that they face that's unlike any disenfranchisement that we've really seen in this country for other groups.
And if people are interested, there's a lot of there's a few books and documentaries. I think the most prominent one about kind of Jews and early basketball is When Basketball Was Jewish, which I think is an oral history of that. And I think kind of early on, it was a way to assimilate for Jewish kids of immigrants living in New York, that it was this kind of American thing that you didn't need a big field. You didn't need a lot of equipment. You could make your own basketball out of newspapers. And so there's a lot. They're all Jewish teams from the early versions of JCCs all over Manhattan too. So I'm happy to share out some of the scholarship on that if people are interested. I think we are probably time to wrap up. Eddie Simon asks, why is Instagram so popular among the players? Eddie, you do not sound like you're in your mid-30s at all with that question.
Eddie, have you been on Instagram? It's I would say it is most popular because, one, it's the most popular social media platform, and two, it's where all the attractive women are, and that's probably the main reason. Um, and
I was just wondering why it wasn't like Snapchat or Facebook, and why are they going there for their information?
So Snapchat is probably the most popular because of the privacy, because you can just send stuff to each other privately there. But nobody uses Facebook anymore under the age of 35 probably. And then Twitter, it's way easier to work with a visual medium than it is with a written medium. So I think that's why Instagram has taken off. But I think that Instagram is the biggest social media platform in the world now as well. So I don't think that's a unique to NBA players thing. But it's so much easier to convey your brand visually than it is to convey your brand through your written messages. And of course, these guys are constantly spending money and spending their time establishing their brand, hiring photographers, videographers, stuff like that to make them look cool. So people like sharing pictures better than they like sharing their words. It's a lot, you can tell a lot. You can tell a million words with a picture, but you can only tell about 15 to 20 with a tweet. So I think that's probably why Instagram wins at the end of the day.
Assuming Instagram has these similar algorithms as Facebook and YouTube, where, like you said with the rabbit hole, if you like one post, you're going to see more and more like it, and reinforces these negative perceptions or stereotypes.
The other day I Googled, I got some bike shorts because I just got a Peloton. And now when I open my Instagram, it keeps showing me ads for bike shorts, and like over and over and over again. And I go into the Explore tab, which is, it kind of curates stuff for you. It's all cycling stuff. And Instagram doesn't get it. I'm not a cycling guy anymore. I'm just an overweight guy trying to get into shape. That's why I got a Peloton. And so, yeah, so you show a little bit of interest in something, or it checks your cookies on your Google searches, and it curates that stuff for you, and it's incredible at that. It might be a little bit wrong. So you might be trying to, maybe you watch a documentary or a 2-minute video on how the earth is flat on Instagram just because you're like, oh, this is weird. I guess I'll watch it just to see how silly it is. And then Instagram's going to send you 30 more videos on why the earth is flat. So same thing with Louis Farrakhan. If you watch one Louis Farrakhan video and you like it because he's saying how black people need to seize control of the of their future and stuff like that, and it's very empowering messaging, then you're going to get 40 more Louis Farrakhan videos, and 3 of them might say Jews control the money, we need to get it from the Jews. So I think that's where Instagram could be a very dangerous tool for teaching people these things. But I also think that for these guys like DeSean Jackson and stuff like that, it didn't start with Instagram. It starts way before that, for sure.
I'm so grateful for this. This is the first time I've ever heard Ernie Grenfeld's name without talking about the Andre Bloch extension too. But I really appreciated it. As somebody who's been a fan of your work, it was really cool to connect. And so thank you for spending the time. Are you in the bubble right now, or are you at home?
No, this is my. I wish I had a. That'd be nice if I had a hotel room with photos of my family on the wall. But no,
I
this
can't
is
see that far, but yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, I'm back home. The bubble only has about 10 reporters or so,
Yeah.
and they didn't offer it to me. If they offered it to me, I probably would have taken it just because you could probably get a book deal out of just being there. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not too jealous of everybody stuck down there.
Well, Mike and Jared, I want to thank you both so much for this really informational and interesting event today. And wish you all the best. Thanks again for talking to us, and for everyone else, hope you check out our other programs, and we'll see you soon.
And Peter, please sign your daughter's cast for me.
Good idea.
I hope
Thanks.
she feels better.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm leaving.